Elvin Frizzell drove his truck down the Devil's Trail, which was a thin ribbon of road that wound through the Nevermore Hollows countryside. The Devil's Trail hadn't always been a road. For nearly 100 years after the founding of the town, it had been a literal path used by witches to sneak into the dark woods where they would meet the devil and perform blasphemous rituals. It was the summer of 1956, and the late morning sun hovered above the trees, casting shafts of golden light onto the fields and hills and vales. It was such a beautiful day that witches and the devil and blasphemous rituals were the farthest things from young Elvin's mind, who had turned 16 the day before and had successfully passed the test to receive his driver's license. He'd used the money he'd saved to buy an old Ford truck, and on this peaceful morning he was driving by himself for the first time, with the AM radio blaring, and he was experiencing a sense of freedom that only driving and rock and roll can bring. He rounded a sharp curve, bobbing along with Bill Haley and the Comets as they sang Rock Around the Clock, when a witch wandered out of the field to his right and into the middle of the road. "Holy crap!" he yelled. He stomped on the brakes and yanked the steering wheel, and the truck slid in a 180-degree arc that came to a stop behind the witch. And then the engine stalled. His hands trembled as he unsuccessfully tried to move the gear shift into park. He shot a frantic glance at the witch, who slowly turned to face him, and his blood ran cold. She had long, dark hair matted with blood and leaves. She was wearing only a pair of panties, which allowed Elvin to see that she was covered in bruises and small cuts. He looked at her face. Her left eye was swollen shut. Her nose had been broken. Her lips split open. That's when he realized that she was not a witch at all, but instead was a girl his age. And he knew her. Her name was Rosemary Boone, a pretty girl that liked to be called Rosie. They went to school together and were in the same grade, though he hadn't seen much of her since school let out a few weeks back. Rosie was no witch. She was kind and sweet and innocent, and someone had hurt her, done bad things to her. He finally got the truck in park, jumped out and ran to the poor girl. Though it was summer, the morning had been cool, so he had worn a denim jacket. He took it off, intending to give it to her so that she could cover up her nakedness. He called her name, softly, gently, trying not to scare her. "Rosie, hey, it's me, Elvin Frizzell. What happened to you?" Though Rosie had turned to face him, her eyes were dull and lifeless. She stared blankly beyond him. Elvin moved closer. She didn't respond. With one hand he held out his jacket to her. With his other hand he gently touched her arm. He expected her to pull back, maybe even cry out in fear. But she just stood there, motionless. He wrapped his jacket around her, trying nobly to give her back some of the dignity that had been stolen from her. He then took her by the hand. He noticed that her nails were broken and the tips of her fingers were raw. She'd clearly put up a fight. He led her back to the truck and helped her inside. As he did, he felt foreboding chill slice down his spine. He straightened and glanced around. He couldn't explain it, but he knew he had to hurry. Someone or something was coming. He shut the passenger door and ran around the truck and slid behind the driver's seat. He turned the ignition, and the engine roared to life. Just then, 2 figures dressed in black robes rushed out of the field and stood a few yards in front of the truck. Their faces were grotesque, with leering smiles full of fangs and cruelly shaped eyes. Elvin realized they were masks, but even so, his heart pounded in his chest. His young body was pumped full of superstitious fear and righteous fury. But his dad had always taught him to be cool under pressure. He was outnumbered, even with the shotgun that was always behind the seat. His priority was to keep Rosie safe and to get her some medical attention. So he slammed the truck in reverse, glanced in the rearview mirror, and said, "Oh, shit!" 2 more cloaked and masked figures were standing behind the truck. Elvin couldn't see that they carried any weapons, but didn't want to wait around to find out. He had the advantage by being in the truck. He was going to use it to get as far away from these freaks as possible, and if they were stupid enough to stand in his way and got themselves run over, then so be it. That meant the world would be infested with a few less scumbags. So he rammed the truck into drive and stomped on the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, and he aimed straight toward the 2 figures in front of him. He was only partially relieved when they jumped out of the way at the last moment. He roared down the road, headed toward town, where he'd take Rosie to the hospital and call the sheriff from there. He shot past the 2 figures and glanced up at the rearview mirror. They had recovered, and now all 4 of them were chasing him on foot. But there was no way they would catch him. He turned his attention back to the road ahead, and that's when another black-robed and masked figure stepped out of the woods and onto the road. This one held up a pistol and took aim. But the truck was moving too fast. The side mirror clipped him on the arm before he could get off a shot. Elvin heard a man's voice cry out in pain as he fell to the ground and rolled into the ditch. Elvin almost lost control, but wrestled the truck into submission and around a curve and out of sight. Sweat poured down his face. His heart raced and his hands shook. He glanced over at Rosie, who didn't even seem to notice what had just happened. She sat in the seat in a catatonic state. "We're safe now, Rosie," Elvin said. "I got you. I'm going to take you to the hospital, and then I'm going to find out what happened to you, and I'm going to bring everyone who hurt you to justice." Rosie finally looked at him. There was still that faraway look in her eyes, but for the briefest moment, she seemed to recognize him and what he had just done for her. A tear spilled down her cheek, and she said, "They have my sister. They have Melissa." It took 20 minutes for Elvin to make it into town and to Eldridge Hospital. After the doctors and nurses got Rosie from the truck, he parked and went inside. On the payphone in the lobby, he called Granger, his pop, and told him what had happened. Granger told him that he was on his way and not to speak to anyone about what happened, especially Sheriff Bowman, which Elvin found odd. While Elvin waited on his pop, a deputy showed up and walked over. Elvin knew this deputy and didn't like him. He was Jackson Isbell, a young, cocky man who acted as if the badge gave him unlimited power, which he used to bully the townsfolk whenever possible. He was tall, lanky, and always had a cocksure grin. "The nurse says you brought that girl in," he said, his right hand on the gun at his hip as if he were receiving authority from it. "That right?" Elvin glanced at the clock on the wall. It had been 15 minutes since he called his pop and knew it took at least double that to get into town from their farm. He loved and respected his pop and was going to honor what he told him about keeping quiet, but he also knew that if he got tight-lipped with Jackson, that it would cause a problem. So he decided to say as little as possible. "Yeah," he replied, "I did." "That nurse said she was pretty much naked except for a pair of panties," Jackson said. "That right?" Elvin nodded. Jackson's cocksure grin devolved into a pornographic sneer. "Old Rosie is a hot little piece, but ain't nobody been able to get her naked as far as I've heard. Now tell me, she got the goods?" Elvin's anger flared, but he kept it in control. He was wise enough to know that he didn't need to let this sick jerk needle him into letting his anger get the best of him. So he simply said, "She was beaten up pretty bad." Jackson's eyes seemed to gleam at the thought of Rosie being bruised and bloody and naked. "Yeah, that's what the nurse said." Just then, Granger stepped into the waiting room. He was 36, solidly built from a life of farm work, and wore an old Braves baseball cap and bib overalls. Elvin realized his pop must have driven like a madman to get there so quickly.
"You okay, son?"
Elvin nodded. "Yeah, Pop, just a little shaken up, but I'm good." Granger turned to Jackson.
"He's a minor. You don't talk to him without me. Got it?"
Two emotions quickly washed over Jackson's face. The first was shock, then anger that Granger took such a direct and firm stance against his authority. "I'll damn well speak to whoever I want, whenever I want, old man. Ain't a damn thing you can do about it. You hear?" Granger didn't reply. He just locked his eyes on Jackson's. There was no menace in his gaze, only a confident conviction of righteousness that was so profound that it caused Jackson to look away. The deputy tried to disguise his defeat by looking at his watch, but it was clear who had the power. "Okay, old man, but Sheriff Bowman will be here shortly, and we will see who's in control then." Jackson turned and strutted over to the nurse's desk where a young candy striper was working. She looked to be no older than 16 years old. He leaned in too close to her and said, "Hey there, little girl. My, ain't you a pretty thing. How about you and me have a conversation?" Granger shook his head in disgust. He turned back to Elvin.
"You said on the phone that she was being chased by some folks in cloaks and masks?"
"Yes, sir," Elvin said. "I ain't gonna lie, Pop. I was scared." Granger took a seat and put a steadying hand on Elvin's knee.
"You kept your head about you, though, and you saved her. I'm proud, son. Real proud."
"I never seen anything like that before," Elvin said. "What do you think was happening? Why were they chasing Rosie? Were they the ones that did that to her?" Granger removed his Braves ball cap and leaned in close so that no one could hear.
"I've always taught you to be aware of your surroundings and to question everything. But what I haven't told you is that there is some corruption in this town."
Elvin knowingly glanced at Deputy Jackson. "Like what, Pop?" Granger glanced around to make sure they were still out of earshot of the deputy.
"Most corruption is about greed, son. Ignoble men use politics to gain money and power. But I think the mayor and the sheriff and a few other powerful men here in this town are up to something much darker than anything political."
"What do you mean?" Elvin said.
"Ever hear of a Hellfire Club, son?"
Elvin's favorite subject in school was history, and he especially enjoyed learning about the founding of America. He had read that Benjamin Franklin, when stationed in England as a diplomat, was a member of a Hellfire Club. Elvin didn't know much about those types of organizations, but had heard rumors that, though rare, they were still in existence. Yeah, it's where a bunch of men get together and talk about politics and business and stuff, right?
No. It's nothing as noble or benign as that. The members are involved in some disgusting deeds which are often satanic. They feel that they are above judgment, both in this life and the next. Naming their organization the Hellfire Club is an act of defiance.
Elvin saw where his pop was taking this line of thought. You think that there's a Hellfire Club here in Nevermore Hollows? Granger nodded.
I do. Up until now, I wasn't sure it had gotten this bad. I prayed it wasn't going to get this dark, but now that they're abducting young girls, it's time we did something about it.
What do you think they were going to do to Rosie, Pop? I mean, she was in bad shape. They weren't just going to let her go, were they?
No, son. They wouldn't let her go. I believe what was next was that they would have used her in some kind of dark sacrifice.
Elvin was shocked, appalled, sickened. To the devil? Granger took a deep breath and let it out slowly.
Yeah, son. To the devil. Or some other pagan god.
Elvin considered what his pop was telling him. Granger had fought in Europe against the Nazis and had always spoken directly to him about the malicious and deadly nature of the world. However, while his pop cautioned him to be vigilant, he also told him that the world was full of wonder and hope. But now, seeing what had happened to Rosie at the hand of corrupt men who lived in this town, Elvin was struggling to see any of that wonder and hope. I clipped one of them with my truck, he said. I think it was his left arm, knocked him into the ditch. Granger considered that for a moment.
If he's wounded, we might be able to identify him.
Elvin knew that this experience was profoundly changing him on a fundamental level. He could feel something inside him slipping away, realized that it was his innocence, and was surprised to feel a sense of melancholy. If we already suspect that the mayor and the sheriff are in on it, and they have all this power, what can we do? Granger thoughtfully scratched his chin, which was covered in short whiskers.
You said Rosie only said one thing?
She said that they had her sister Melissa, Elvin replied. And she's only 14 years old, Pop. Granger stood and put on his ball cap.
There's only one thing we can do, son. We go get Melissa, and we take these bastards down.
Elvin stood with his pop. He was scared, but trusted in his pop's wisdom and strength. Where do we start?
First, we speak to Doc Fike. I know him. We can trust him. We let him know what we think, and he can protect Rosie while we go get her sister.
Dr. John Fike was 50. He stood 6'2" and was strong both physically and mentally. He'd been the town's OBGYN before the war, but had become a surgeon when he'd served in the battle for the Pacific. And because of what he'd witnessed there, he was afraid of nothing this world could throw at him. Doc grimaced as he listened to Elvin's story. When the boy was done, he said, I've also been suspecting something like this, gentlemen, and I've been considering how to deal with it as well. I have no doubt the sheriff is a member of that damned club. He'll want to get close to Rosie, but I'll tell him she's in a coma and that I doubt she'll survive the night. I don't trust anyone else here in this hospital, so I'll stay here and take care of her. You go do what you need to do." Granger and Elvin left the hospital just as Sheriff Bowman walked in. He was in his 30s, had also been a soldier in the war, but had come away from it with a taste for power. They stopped long enough to let Elvin give an official statement about how he found Rosie and the cloaked men who came after them. "How do you know they were men?" Bowman asked. "What do you mean?" Elvin replied. Bowman was reading every tick and twitch of Elvin's body language. "The folks wearing those cloaks. You said they were men, but if they were wearing masks, how do you know they weren't women?" Elvin shrugged. "I just figured that another woman wouldn't hurt a girl like Rosie. Only a man has that kind of evil in his heart." They answered a couple more questions, then Granger led Elvin outside.
"You did good, son. Now, I hate to ask you to do anything you don't feel right doing, but you're already in the middle of this. You in?"
Elvin nodded. "I'm in, Pop."
"All right, then. You can ride with me. We're going to go save Melissa, but first we need some help."
"Who would that be?" Elvin asked as he got into the passenger side of his dad's Chevy truck. Granger slid behind the wheel and adjusted his ball cap.
"We're going to get Pat."
They drove across town to the Weeping Prophet Catholic Church, where Father Patrick Flanagan was the presiding priest. Everyone in town referred to him as Father Patrick, but Granger simply called him Pat, because they had been friends who had grown up together in Nevermore Hollows. They had also joined the army together the day after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and they'd been lucky enough to serve and fight together. As they drove, Granger explained that he and Pat had been discussing how to move against the corruption in town. Father Patrick was not what most people expected a priest to look like. He was only 35, same age as Granger, and had the physique of an Olympian, which he attributed to a strict exercise regimen and healthy genes passed down from his Irish dad and his Norwegian mother. He kept the sides of his head in a close buzz cut, but the hair was long at the top and back and pulled into a ponytail. Instead of wearing a priestly cassock, he wore only a black, short-sleeved, button-down shirt with a white clerical collar, faded jeans, and a pair of Army surplus combat boots. The result was that he looked less like a priest and more like the evolution of a Viking warrior. He was standing out front of the church updating the sign when Granger and Elvin drove up. He leaned in through the passenger seat, gave Elvin a strong pat on the shoulder, and was prepared to say something about the beautiful day, but stopped when he saw the grim look on Granger's face.
"Is it time?"
"It's time."
Father Patrick's green eyes hardened.
"What happened?"
Granger motioned for Elvin to tell the story, which he did. When Elvin was done, Granger said,
"We need to go get Rosie's sister."
"And put a stop to these damn cultists in their reign of darkness. Give me a minute. I need to collect a couple of things. Meet me around back. I need to let Sister Christian know I'll be gone for a bit so she can take care of anyone who wanders in."
Patrick went back inside the church and spoke with Sister Christian, who was distributing Bibles amongst the pews. She was in her 30s and always had the kind of smile that indicated she understood the mysteries of the world. He took a moment to let her know what he and Granger and Elvin were going to do. "That's very dangerous, Father," she said. "It seems the odds are against you." Patrick gave her a roguish smile. His green eyes radiated cavalier confidence.
We can't lose, sister. This is a righteous battle, and we have God on our side.
Sister Christian nodded thoughtfully as she recalled the thousands of good men who had died in a supposedly righteous war only a few years ago. That may be true, but sometimes God allows casualties in a righteous war, Father. Father Patrick knew that she was correct. However, neither his smile nor his faith faltered. Instead, he winked at her and said,
Death doesn't scare me, sister, but being a coward does.
She gave him one of her enigmatic smiles and pronounced a blessing over him. Patrick left her with instructions on who to contact should he not return, and stepped into his office, grabbed his Colt pistol and a curious length of black rope, then headed back out to the truck. Elvin slid over and let him in, and Granger drove them out of town and back to the Devil's Trail. By the time they got to the place where Elvin found Rosie and had his run-in with the Hellfire Club members, it was almost 4 o'clock. They pulled over, got out, and stood at the back of the truck.
It makes sense to me that wherever they meet must be close.
I agree. If she was in a near catatonic state like you say, Elvin, then she couldn't have run far. Not to mention that the cultists were still wearing their cloaks and masks. It would have been cumbersome to run very far in that get-up.
I clipped the one right over there, Elvin said. He fell in that ditch. They split up and started looking for any sign that might indicate from which direction the cultists had come. After about 10 minutes of wandering in the field next to the road, Elvin called for his dad and Father Patrick. I found a boot print here in the mud, he said. Granger squatted to get a better look at the print.
Looks military.
Sheriff Bowman wears military boots.
Granger took a few steps away, scanning the ground.
There's another one over here. Looks like it's a cowboy boot. And those over there might be standard work boots.
He looked to the edge of the tree line about 50 yards away.
I think they came from there.
That's what I figured. I'm not looking forward to going into those woods.
Nevermore Hollow sits on the coast. It consists of the town proper, which butts up against a bay, and is surrounded on 3 sides by rolling farmland and hundreds of square miles of Dunwich forest, which seems dark even on the brightest of days. Nobody willingly ventured too far into the forest. Those that did rarely came back, and if they did, they were changed by what they'd seen lurking there. Do you think they have a place where they meet in there? Elvin asked.
You can bet on it,
Granger said. He removed his Braves ball cap and wiped sweat away from his brow. But wouldn't they move Melissa now that they think we might know? Elvin replied. His dad shook his head.
Son, we're dealing with men who are drunk on power. It makes them arrogant and gives them a false sense of security. I bet they still have her somewhere in there. They will think we're too stupid or too weak to try anything.
Evil men aren't smart. They just think they are.
Right. And that's what's usually their Achilles heel. It's how we can beat them.
They went back to the truck. Elvin grabbed his 12-gauge shotgun. Granger grabbed his Winchester rifle and a hunting knife. Father Patrick took the curious piece of rope he'd retrieved from his office. It was black with evenly spaced knots tied in it. What is that? Elvin asked, nodding at the length of rope.
It's a chalky.
Elvin saw that it was about 3 feet long, and at the point where the two ends were tied was affixed a small cross made of iron. What's it used for?
For prayer. It's an Eastern Catholic rosary. But instead of being like the Western Catholic rosaries with beads, this one has knots in it. The knots help you count prayers.
Elvin considered this information. Well, I guess we're going to need all the prayers we can get. Father Patrick flashed his rogue smile.
This isn't a normal chalky. This one was blessed by St. Moses the Black in the 4th century.
Who was that? Elvin asked.
One badass warrior monk. When this is over, I'm going to teach you everything there is to know about him.
Elvin smiled. Warrior monk, he said. Sounds cool. But is that all you're bringing? Father Patrick pulled up his shirt, which he had untucked back at the church, revealing his own Colt .45 pistol that was in a holster.
Oh, no. I'm not crazy. I got firepower. The gun is for the human battle we're about to go into. The chalky is for the spiritual part of the battle.
Elvin handed the Chotki back to Patrick. He wasn't clear on how exactly Father Patrick would use the Chotki in any way that could help them, but he trusted the priest. They walked to the edge of the woods, and when they stepped from the field into the forest, it seemed as if they had stepped from daylight into a deep twilight. A few yards inside, they found a white ribbon hanging from a branch. It was splattered with polka dots of blood. I bet that's Rosie's, Elvin said. She always wears a white ribbon in her hair at school. Granger glanced around, looking for other signs that might show from which direction Rosie had come during her escape.
There,
he said, pointing toward a cluster of oak saplings.
There are some broken branches. I bet she ran through there. Then the cultists followed her.
Beyond the saplings was a small game trail. They saw Rosie's bare footprints, which were stomped over by the various boot prints. Though thin shafts of golden sunlight pierced the canopy, there were still times that they had to squint to see through the gloom. Finally, after 15 minutes, they climbed a ridge and looked down onto a clearing. Sitting in the center was a stone building. The building was about the size of a hunting cabin. It did not have a porch. The windows were covered, though they could discern a glow coming from inside, as if the room beyond the walls was lit by candlelight. Careful not to be seen, the three of them crept down the ridge and knelt behind a patch of brush. They were about 30 yards away from the building.
This has to be the place,
Granger said. Father Patrick nodded.
Yep, this is the place. There's an inverted pentagram carved on the door.
They would be that obvious? Elvin asked.
Not always. Evil people aren't normally bold. They like to hide and work their machinations in the dark.
Granger grunted his affirmation at Father Patrick's statement.
Good people stand in the light, son. They will openly fight for what they believe in, but evil people work in the dark, like cockroaches. But every now and then, enough of these bastards get together and they start thinking they're too powerful to bring down. When that happens, they get less cautious, and usually a lot nastier.
Elvin knew what his dad was talking about. Like the Nazis? Granger had been part of the team who liberated the Jewish prisoners at Dachau. He remembered the thousands of bodies stacked atop each other, the massive mounds of discarded clothing taken from those poor souls, the survivors lurching around, emaciated, with the spark of life missing in their eyes, as if they were ghouls who had just crawled from shallow graves. He knew that horror could have been averted if only good men had stood against the Nazis when they were a small cult meeting in beer houses before they gained political power.
Yes, son. Like the Nazis.
The evil men in this town have obtained a bit of power, and they've likely gotten to the point that they feel untouchable. So, they're getting bolder. But today, we put a stop to it before it gets any worse.
Son, it pains me to no end that you're going to partake in what we're about to do. We're going to have to kill these men, and it will live with you for the rest of your life. But like Father Patrick here is getting at, what we're doing is noble and righteous. That's how you live with what we're about to do. You understand?
Elvin nodded. He had knots in his stomach, and he was scared, but he trusted his dad and respected Father Patrick. I understand, Pop. I'll be okay. Granger had a concerned look on his face.
I wish we knew how many were in there,
he said, turning his attention to the building.
And what kind of firepower they have. I don't like going in blind.
Patrick ran a hand along the top of his red hair and down his ponytail as he considered a plan.
We already suspect it'll be the most powerful men in town. That's Mayor Stein, Sheriff Bowman, Belvedere Chase, the bank president. Who am I missing?
I bet Haggard Elrich is in on it.
That makes sense. His being patriarch of the richest family in town and all. Not to mention he's the chairman of the board of the hospital. We've never been able to prove it. The Eldridge family history is filled with stories of witchcraft, Satanism, and worse. So I bet Haggard will be there.
Isn't Haggard like really old? Elvin said. Granger grunted.
He is. That just means he's likely the leader of the club.
Elvin considered this piece of information, then said, What about Old Man Winter?
Possibly. Old Alfred does own the two most successful businesses in town. He's surely going to be there, and they will likely have some weak-minded men who have signed on to protect him.
And that makes 5. Not counting their bootlicking lackeys.
Just then, they heard movement in the forest to their left, and 4 men stepped from a small trail into the clearing. The sheriff and the mayor were wearing robes but had not yet put on their fearsome masks. The other 2 were deputies who were not wearing cloaks. They were in their uniforms. One was Deputy Isbell and another shorter, fatter man named Dwayne Cleveland. Mayor Herman Stein was tall, thin, and wore a flashy mustache. He was vain, with a meticulous coif of hair dyed jet black, as was his mustache. He limped slightly and was favoring his arm. I can't believe that bastard Vike thinks he can keep that girl from us, he said. Who the hell does he think he is? He's suspicious of us is what he is, replied Bowman. Besides, Fike said she was in a coma, and when I glanced in her room, it did look that way to me. We couldn't take her while she was in that condition. If you'd followed my plan, Stein said, but was cut off by Bowman. Your plan was garbage, Herman. Your ruse was that He would release her to me so that I could question her, but instead bring her here, and when we were done with her, tell him that she escaped and ran off. That never would have worked. Almost everyone in town fears us, but there are a few who would fight us hard if they knew what we were doing with the Hellfire Club." Herman shrugged off Bowman's retort. "Sooner or later, we're going to have to squash any opposition. Might as well be now." Bowman shook his head. "Let's stick to the plan, which is to quietly kill off those who would oppose us. I've already gotten rid of a few, and I plan on taking care of that damned priest and his war buddy." Stein grunted his submission to Bowman's plan. "Well, just make sure you add that little bastard Elvin to your list. I owe him for making me jump into the ditch earlier today. My arm and leg are killing me." "Oh, I will," Bowman said. "But I can't move too fast. We can't have too many people go missing all at once. We aren't that powerful." The men made it to the front door of the building and paused. Herman said, "Yet. We aren't that powerful yet. But we will be." He turned to the two deputies. "Stand guard. I doubt anyone will be brave enough or stupid enough to come into this forest looking for us, but you never know. I don't want the ritual to be interrupted. This girl, Melissa, she is a sweet little thing, and I can't wait to have my fun." Bowman and Stein slipped on their masks and pulled their hoods up over their heads. They opened the door and stepped inside the building, leaving the two deputies to themselves. Jackson turned to Dwayne. "Let's set up a patrol around the clearing. I'll take the front half and you take the back. You see anything that isn't part of the Hellfire Club, you shoot it. No hesitation. You understand?" Deputy Cleveland was heavy and had a ruddy face with a wispy beard. He was one of those types of men who knew he would never have power and wealth, but was comfortable serving those who did. "I got it. I kinda hope those assholes show up and try something. I ain't killed nobody yet, not like you have." Jackson gave his greasy, cocksure smile. "You stick with me, I'll make sure it happens. Now that everyone's here, the ritual's about to start. Now you stay focused. Once they get started chanting, they slip into some kind of trance for a bit. Once they're done with that, the fun starts. Now, try not to get excited when you hear that young piece of tail screaming." The eager look on Dwayne's face made him look like a hungry pig. He shambled around the back of the building, and Jackson headed toward the edge of the clearing, directly toward Granger and Patrick and Elvin, who were hidden behind the brush. Granger removed his Braves cap and stuffed it in one of the pockets of his overalls. He leaned in and whispered to Patrick,
"We need to take him without gunfire."
Patrick motioned that he was going to maneuver around the left side of the brush. Granger carefully made his way around to the right side. They took up positions, and when Jackson got close enough, Patrick grabbed a handful of small branches and gave them a shake. Deputy Jackson turned toward the distraction, dropped his hand onto his holster, ready to pull his weapon. Granger shot out from behind the brush behind him, hunting knife in hand. Rabbit quick, he put his left hand around Jackson's mouth, and with his right hand, he slipped the blade into the base of his skull and up into his brain. Jackson stiffened for the briefest moment, then went limp. The only sound he made was a death gasp. Granger quickly dragged him behind the brush and dropped him to the ground. Elvin thought that he had been ready to experience the death of another human being. But witnessing the necessary brutality that his dad had used to kill Jackson left him rattled. He was pale and trembling. Granger put a steadying hand on his shoulder, thought better about it, then pulled his son into a hug.
Sorry, buddy. I am so sorry you had to see that.
Elvin drew strength from his dad's embrace. He felt his trembling subside. I'm okay, Pop. I promise. I know we had to do it to save Melissa. Father Patrick made the sign of the cross, then said,
How do you suggest we take care of Dwayne?
Same thing we did here. Let's circle around the building to the left. There's plenty of cover. I'll hide behind that oak, and when Dwayne gets close enough, you get his attention, and I'll take him down.
They made their way around the clearing, and Granger hid behind the massive trunk of the oak. Dwayne had wandered to the far side of the building. However, when he turned and headed back toward them, his trajectory was such that he would pass by the oak, thus making it unnecessary for Father Patrick to have to give any kind of distraction. When he walked by, Granger stepped out and slid the blade of the hunting knife into the base of his brain. Dwayne was heavier than Jackson had been, and both Father Patrick and Elvin had to help drag his body beyond the clearing. They had dropped the body behind a fallen log and turned their attention to the back of the building. There were no windows, though there was a door set directly in the center of the wall. As they discussed a strategy on how to enter the building, the cultists inside began chanting.
The ritual started. We need to move.
What can we expect to see inside there? Elvin asked. Patrick shrugged.
I honestly don't know, but no matter what happens, we stay focused.
We're here for Melissa. If it's not her, they die.
Elvin's heart was already racing from fear and adrenaline, but now it literally pounded in his chest at the idea of having to take another person's life. Then he remembered how beaten and terrified Rosie had been, considered how else she may have been used by these wicked men, and his resolve strengthened. I'm ready, he said.
Okay. The inside's probably laid out like a cabin. Just one big room that serves both as a kitchen and living area. Maybe a single bedroom. We go in through the back door. I'll get it open, and son, you step in to the left, shotgun up, ready to shoot anybody who isn't Melissa. I'll go in with you and step to the right. Patrick, you come in low behind us and take the center.
Elvin and Patrick nodded. They made their way, keeping low, to the back door. As they approached, they heard the chanting build with a chorus of male voices. Once at the door, Granger tested the handle. The door was open. He gave a nod, pushed the door, and they shot forward. Elvin had the shotgun raised and stepped to the left, Granger to the right, rifle ready, and Patrick came in and took center point, his pistol aimed forward. Then they stopped cold, in complete shock at what they saw. The room was lit with black candles, which were set in a circle around a large wooden table. The candles flickered and quivered, causing the deep shadows in the room to writhe as if in response to the chanting. There were only 5 men seated around the table, in plain chairs made of dark wood. All were dressed in robes and wearing those gruesome masks. They were so lost in their chanting and their focus on what was laid out on the table that they did not notice when Elvin and Granger and Patrick stepped inside the building. Melissa was lying naked on the table. Her eyes were open but lacked the spark of life. She was in a catatonic state like what her sister Rosie had been in when Elvin had found her in the middle of the road. The robed men each held sharp, silver-bladed knives with ornate handles. They were chanting in a reckless cadence. It was so chaotic that Elvin would only recall catching short phrases about eating the poor girl's body and drinking her innocence. There was an empty chair, this one a throne, with a high back that was ornately carved with a large pentagram. It sat at the head of the table in the place of honor. Suddenly, flames sprang up in the fireplace located at the far side of the room. The cultists' chanting got louder, their lust for the feast growing. From the crackling, hissing flames crawled an abomination so disturbing that it caused Elvin's heart to stutter in his chest. Granger gasped in shock. Father Patrick made the sign of the cross and mumbled a prayer. The thing was the torso of a man, but sprouting from an abnormally long neck was not a human head, but instead the head of a giant monitor lizard. The base of the neck was human flesh that slowly morphed into the thick, pebbled skin of the lizard. It had 6 human arms, 3 on each side, but it had no legs. There was no need for them, because the abomination used its arms and hands to crawl like a spider across the wooden floor. The abomination crept toward the table. It was swaying along with the chanting, as if being drawn to the feast. It crawled over to the table and took a seat in the hellish throne. Then the chanting stopped. The 5 cultists turned their attention to the beast sitting on the throne. Its forked tongue flicked out and hungrily licked its lips. It drew in a deep, rumbling breath and said, "Beast." Now that the chanting was silenced and the beast had given its dark blessing on the feast, the spell over the 12 men seemed to have been broken. And for the first time, they noticed that Elvin, Patrick, and Granger were in the room. They shot up out of their chairs and brandished their knives. One of them said, "Kill them!" Father Patrick was as appalled as Elvin and Granger were, but he knew he had to give a call to action so that they could collectively steady themselves for the fight to come. He turned to them and yelled,
"The Lord is with us. Let's put this enemy to shame."
The cultists shot forward, preparing to slash with their silver knives. Granger fired a shot into the closest cultist's chest. The mask flew off, revealing the face of Belvedere Chase, the banker. His eyes were wide with shock as he fell dead to the floor. The tallest cultist shrugged out of his cloak. It was Sheriff Bowman. He snatched his pistol from his hip before the cloak hit the ground, but Granger fired around into his throat, dropping him. Bowman hit the floor, gagging on his own blood. Elvin saw Haggard Eldritch, the patriarch of the town's evilest family, standing over Melissa, who was still unmoving on the table. Haggard's mask had fallen away, revealing his wrinkled face as he raised his silver knife. He was in his 70s, with lust-filled eyes and an entitled grin. He was determined to kill the girl, as if unaware of the battle that raged around him. Elvin knew he couldn't fire his shotgun. He'd hit Melissa for sure, so he did the only thing he could do. He ran at Haggard and slammed into him just as he plunged a knife down toward Melissa's chest. Haggard was knocked forward into the table, across Melissa, and the knife plunged into her shoulder. But Melissa had withdrawn so far into herself that she did not even blink. Haggard yanked the knife free and twisted around, intending to stab Elvin, but Elvin punched him in the face, knocking the old man out. Haggard slumped to the floor, and Elvin snatched a knife from his limp hand. By now, the two remaining cultists had torn off their masks and cloaks so that they could more easily fight. They were Alfred Winter and Mayor Stein. Stein had grabbed the bowman's pistol. He raised it at Granger and fired, but the shot was wide. Granger raised his rifle and let off a shot that tore through the mayor's face. Though everybody in town referred to Alfred Winter as an old man, he was in fact only 40 years old. He was given that moniker because he had been prematurely gray since he was in his late 20s, making him look older than he was. He was fit and quick. He grabbed an axe that sat next to the fireplace. He ran forward and swung it at Elvin. When Elvin tried to step back, he tripped over Haggard's limp body and fell. Father Patrick put a bullet through Alfred's chest, knocking him against the wall. Alfred dropped dead onto the floor. Though the battle was fierce, it had thus far lasted less than a minute. The beast realized that the battle was lost, and it crawled from the throne and skittered across the floor, heading back to the fireplace. Father Patrick intuited somehow that the fireplace must be the portal that led to whatever realm of hell this abomination had come from, and that it was trying to escape. He fired around into the torso, but the monster was unfazed. Patrick quickly slid his gun into his holster, grabbed the long black Chotki that had been blessed by St. Moses the Black, and jumped onto the beast's back. The beast squirmed its monitor lizard head around to bite Patrick, but it was unsuccessful. However, this move made it easier for Patrick to slip the rope over the beast's snout and down under its jaw. Patrick yanked on the Chotki, pulling it tight against the monster's throat, using it as a garrote. The black rope sizzled against the monster's skin, causing it to scream in pain and rage. It cursed in English and various other languages, some of which were not human. Father Patrick twisted the rope, pulling back with all his might. The beast thrashed and bucked and used two of its hands to claw at Patrick's arms. But Patrick shrugged them off and yanked harder. The beast yelled,
"I curse you and your entire bloodline."
Father Patrick, sensing victory at hand, grunted,
Yeah, well, I reject your curse and banish you back to hell.
He reached deep down within himself and mustered every ounce of strength available. Then he gave a final, righteous yank and snapped the beast's neck. The abomination fell to the floor, spasmed, then went limp. To their amazement, the body began to dissolve with a sizzling noise and a sulfuric stench. In less than a minute, all that was left was a burnt spot on the wooden floor. Father Patrick stood, breathing hard. There was a long, silent moment as the men processed all that had just happened. Then Granger said,
"Is that a demon?"
Not one of your garden varieties of demonic entities, but yeah, it's a demon.
Granger stepped forward to get a closer look.
"You kill it?"
No, they can't be killed.
Elvin was amazed but confused. It seems it was trying to escape back to hell. So, if you didn't kill it, what did you accomplish by breaking its neck? Father Patrick gave his roguish grin.
I sent it back to hell in a lot of pain.
They quickly decided to make sure there were no other cultists hiding in the bedrooms or bathroom. All was clear. Then they turned their attention to Haggard, intending to roust him from his stupor, but they found that he was dead.
Must have had a heart attack.
"Looks like it. Saves us effort."
What do we do with the bodies? Elvin asked. Granger thought for a moment.
I say we drag 'em out of here and deeper into the woods.
So we're going to bury them? Elvin asked.
No, son. There are things in this cursed forest that will take care of these bodies for us. I'd bet by morning there'll be nothing left of 'em.
It took them only 30 minutes to toss the bodies deeper into the forest. By the time that they were finished, Melissa had come out of her withdrawn state enough that she understood that she had been rescued. They found a blanket so that she could cover herself, and they took her back to the hospital. Doc Fike had been able to draw Rosie out of her own catatonic state, and then Melissa crawled into the hospital bed with Rosie, and they held each other and cried. You think they'll be okay, Doc? Elvin asked. Doc Fike put a strong hand on Elvin's shoulder. They are alive and they have each other, because of you, young man. It will take some time, but yeah, I think they'll recover. I'll make sure their physical wounds are healed, and I'm confident that Father Patrick and Sister Christian will help them deal with their spiritual and emotional trauma. But you did good, son. Fike looked at Granger and Patrick. All of you did good. Granger put an arm around Elvin.
I'm proud of you, boy.
What do you say we go grab some food? Doc Fike said. There's a new joint that just opened up on the outskirts of town. They specialize in waffles, but I hear they make a mean burger. My treat. The men left the hospital and headed to Willie's Waffle Hut, which was owned by a gregarious black raconteur named Willie Dubois, who claimed he had once wrestled a skunk ape into submission. Willie made sure they had the best booth, and then he sat with them, and they spent the evening discussing in open their plans to keep the town clean of the evil men who discussed their wicked machinations in private.